You think she even understands what's happening here?" Richard Harrison sneered, glancing toward the woman who had been quietly serving drinks at his table all evening. His voice was low, but the condescension was clear. The billion-dollar deal they were negotiating had already been tense, but now, the sudden collapse of his son in the middle of the dinner was turning everything upside down. The room fell silent as his son, young and fragile, slumped into his chair, his face pale and his body trembling. Guests exchanged nervous glances, but no one moved. No one seemed to know what to do. Richard's eyes darted around the room, frustration and fear creeping into his normally composed demeanor. The son he had spent years building a legacy for was now helpless, and for a brief moment, Richard realized how powerless he really was. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone, but before he could dial, a voice broke through the panic. "I've got this." Maria Wilson, the young black waitress who had been serving drinks with practiced grace, stepped forward. Her calm presence was in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. Maria had seen this before. People in power, people who thought they could buy their way out of any situation, and people who were far too used to being served rather than doing the serving. But tonight, she was the one who would make the difference. Without a second thought, Maria rushed over to Richard's son, her mind focused, her movements swift. She had no time for hesitation or fear. The boy's life was hanging by a thread, and Maria knew she had the skills to save him. She kneeled beside him, checking for signs of life, her fingers expertly assessing his breathing. She had worked hard to get here, from a small town where dreams were as rare as opportunities to a high-end restaurant serving the wealthiest in the city. But she had always known one thing. There was more power in kindness, more strength in action than in standing by and waiting for someone else to do the right thing. "Stay with me," Maria whispered softly to the boy, her voice steady and calm, even as her heart raced. Richard watched in stunned silence as Maria moved. With confidence, lifting his son with surprising ease, guiding him toward the exit. Guests watched, mouths agape, unsure of what to do. But Maria was not waiting for anyone's approval. She didn't need it. As she reached the door, Richard snapped out of his shock and finally found his voice. "You don't even know what you're doing," he shouted, but his words fell flat as Maria turned back to look at him. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied, her eyes meeting his with an unspoken strength. The ambulance arrived just in time, and Richard's son was rushed to the hospital. As Maria watched them leave, she felt a strange mix of emotions. She had done what she had to do, what no one else could. And yet, as the sound of the sirens faded into the distance, Maria couldn't help but wonder what the consequences would be for Richard Harrison. Would he ever understand what she had just done for him? Would he see her as more than just the waitress who had served him dinner that night? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain. Maria had changed the course of the night, and possibly Richard Harrison's life. As the paramedics rushed Richard Harrison's son to the hospital, Maria stood frozen for a moment outside the restaurant, the rain still pouring around her. She felt the weight of the situation, but it wasn't just the boy's life that had shifted in the past few minutes. It was everything. She had stepped into the storm, not with hesitation, but with a certainty that few would have had. Yet, the events that had unfolded didn't seem to faze her. After all, this was her world, quiet, unnoticed, and often overlooked. She had always known what it was like to be invisible. What she didn't know was how the night would change the man who had never even seen her before. Richard Harrison, the billionaire CEO, had just witnessed something no one expected. He had watched as the woman who had served him wine and bread was the one to save his son's life. He watched as a waitress, someone he never even bothered to remember, did what the highly paid professionals around him couldn't. And it was started to eat at him. The next day, Richard couldn't shake the image of Maria's calm face, her confidence, and her quiet strength. He had spent years building his empire, making deals that changed markets, but nothing had ever left him feeling so powerless. A simple act of kindness from someone who was supposed to be insignificant had shattered that illusion. He had always prided himself on being in control, but for the first time, Richard felt like he had been the one out of control, watching from the sidelines as Maria took charge. He was supposed to be the one saving the day, not a waitress who had never even been invited to the table. The more he thought about it, the more it disturbed him. The disparity between him and Maria, the unspoken divide that separated them. And yet, Maria had crossed that line without hesitation. He needed no more. The next day, Richard showed up at the hospital where his son was recovering. He was anxious, pacing in his office, not sure how to approach her, not sure if she would even be willing to talk. She had saved his son's life. It should have been enough. And yet, there was something more he wanted to say, something more that needed to be done. He picked up the phone and called her. "Maria," he said, his voice slightly trembling. "I owe you more than just gratitude. You've given me something I can't buy. I need to make things right. Can we meet?" Maria stood in her small apartment, looking at the phone in her hand. She had expected a thank you, maybe a gift or a check for her services. But she didn't expect this. Make things right, she thought. Was it enough? Could money ever make things right? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. The story wasn't over yet. Richard's world was about to change, and Maria was going to make sure he knew exactly what it meant to truly understand power. The next morning, Maria sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee and staring out the window. The rain from the night before had cleared, but she still felt a heaviness in the air. The phone call from Richard Harrison lingered in her mind. Make things right? She wondered, her thoughts drifting. She had never expected a billionaire to call her, let alone ask for a meeting. What could he possibly want? From her? The day passed slowly, and, as the evening approached, she received another message from Richard. It was short, but it caught her attention. "I'll be at your restaurant tomorrow. Please meet me." Maria wasn't sure what to expect, but something told her this wasn't going to be a simple thank you. The next day, when Maria arrived at the restaurant, Richard was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking somewhat out of place. He stood up when he saw her, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something more uncertain. "Maria," he began, his voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I can't shake the feeling that I owe you more than just a thank you. What you did for my son, it was more than a rescue. You changed everything." Maria stood still for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. "I just did what needed to be done." Richard shook his head. "That's the problem, Maria. You did what needed to be done while the rest of us just stood there. I watched you, and I realized something. People like me, we don't see people like you. We don't even notice you until we need something." Maria's eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet. Richard continued, his words coming faster now, almost desperate. "I've spent my life building an empire, fighting to control everything around me. But you," he paused, trying to find the right words. "You have something I don't. You've seen the world in a way that I haven't. And I need to know how." Maria felt a knot in her stomach. "You think I'm some kind of expert?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with skepticism. Richard nodded. "Not an expert, but someone who understands what really matters. I've realized that all this time I've been focused on the wrong things. Power, control, money, but none of that matters if you can't see the people who are really holding everything together." Maria couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and curiosity. "So what now?" she asked, her arms crossed. Richard looked at her with a mix of regret and hope in his eyes. "I want to change," he said. "I don't want to be the man I was before. I want to do more, but I need your help. Will you work with me? Help me see things differently?" Maria took a deep breath. She had always known that people like Richard would never truly understand what it meant to struggle, to fight for every little thing. But she also knew that people could change. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll help you. But it's not going to be easy," she warned. Richard smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I'm willing to learn. I just hope it's not too late." And as they sat down to talk, Maria realized that this wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about saving Richard from the same blind spots that had caused him to overlook everything that truly mattered. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who could change the world, one step at a time. Maria sat across from Richard in the quiet corner of the restaurant, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. The city lights outside flickered in the distance, but inside, the tension was palpable. Richard had been pouring his heart out, explaining his regrets and his desire for change. But Maria wasn't ready to buy into his promises just yet. "I've spent my life thinking that power was everything," he said, his voice lower now. "But I see now that it's just a facade. You've shown me that real power lies in understanding people, in seeing them, not just for what they can do for you, but for who they truly are." Maria didn't respond immediately. She knew Richard's words were sincere, but she also knew they came from a place of guilt and self-realization. "It's not just about changing your company, Richard," she finally said, her tone steady. "It's about changing how you view the world. You've spent years building walls, making decisions that benefit only you. But now, you're asking me to help you tear them down." Richard nodded slowly. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm willing to do the work. I want to build something better. I want to understand the people who actually make things happen, the ones who are always behind the scenes." Maria leaned back in her chair, studying him. She had seen men like him before, people who thought they could buy their way to everything. But Richard seemed different now. He wasn't just asking for forgiveness or trying to make himself feel better. He was asking for something real, something that could change the way he had been living. "If you really want to change," Maria said, her voice firm, "then you need to listen. Not just to me, but to everyone around you. The people you've been ignoring. The people who have been doing the work that you've taken for granted." Richard didn't interrupt. He was listening, really listening for the first time. Maria could see the shift in him. "It's going to take time," she continued. "You can't just snap your fingers and fix everything. You need to prove to the people you've hurt that you're serious. It's not about making big gestures. It's about the little things. The way you treat people. The way you show up for them." Richard's eyes softened. "I understand. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling in. Maria could see that Richard was sincere, but she also knew that words meant little without action. She wasn't sure if he would follow through, but she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of something bigger. "I'll help you," she said finally, breaking the silence. "But only if you're ready to put in the work. It's going to be hard, but it's the only way." Richard smiled, a small but genuine smile, the first one she had seen in a long time. "I'm ready," he said, and for the first time, Maria believed him. Weeks passed, and Maria watched Richard as he began to follow through on his promises. The changes were subtle at first, small gestures that spoke volumes. He started listening to the staff, acknowledging the people who had been working tirelessly behind the scenes. At the office, he made an effort to engage with the employees he had always overlooked, the ones who had been doing the work while he focused on the bigger picture. He stopped walking past people without saying hello, stopped acting like his wealth and position entitled him to ignore the humanity of those around him. Richard's transformation wasn't just about improving his business. It was about improving himself. And Maria? She kept her distance, watching closely, knowing that actions were the only true measure of change. One afternoon, Richard walked into the restaurant, looking different. There was no suit, no air of superiority. Just a man, someone trying to make amends. "Maria," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I need your help with something." She raised an eyebrow, not sure what he could possibly need. "I've been working on a new initiative," he continued. "A program for young people who've been overlooked, people like you, people who have talent but are never given the chance. I want to fund scholarships, mentorship programs. I want to make sure that the next generation doesn't feel invisible the way I did." Maria looked at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "What's your angle?" she asked bluntly. Richard smiled, but it wasn't the confident, calculating smile she had seen so many times before. "No angle. I just want to make a difference. For once, I want to do something that actually matters." Maria took a deep breath. She had heard words like this before, promises that sounded good but faded away when the work became hard. But something in Richard's eyes told her this was different. She could see that he was actually starting to understand. "All right," she said, her voice firm, "but don't think it's going to be easy. This is the real work. You'll have to fight for it, not just for yourself, but for the people who will never get the chance unless you're willing to give it to them." Richard nodded. I'm ready. And for the first time, Maria believed him. They spent the next few months developing the program together, with Maria serving as his guide, showing him the community, the people who had so much potential but had been left behind by the system. They met with students, mentors, and community leaders, listening to their stories, and Richard's understanding deepened with each conversation. He began to see just how much he had taken for granted, just how many people had been excluded from the opportunities he had always had. And when the program launched, it wasn't just a success, it was a revolution. Maria watched from the sidelines, proud but distant. She had helped him get here, but this was his journey now. He had earned the chance to make a real impact. And as he stood at the podium, speaking to the crowd of young people who now had a chance at a better life, Maria knew that for once, Richard Harrison wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man who had finally understood what it meant to be truly powerful. Months passed, and Richard's initiative continued to grow, gaining momentum with each passing day. The mentorship program was thriving, providing opportunities for young, talented individuals who had previously been overlooked. Maria kept her distance, observing from afar, knowing that the real change had to come from Richard himself. She had guided him, but now he had to carry it on his own. One afternoon, Richard reached out to her again. Maria, I need you to see something, he said, his voice urgent but calm. She agreed to meet him, curious about what he wanted to show her. When she arrived at the office, Richard was standing by the window, looking out over the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but his focus was elsewhere. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he began. You told me it's not about big gestures, that it's the small things that matter. Well, I want to show you something. He handed her a folder filled with photos and documents. Maria took a deep breath and began to look through the materials. What she saw left her speechless. The photos showed young people, men from the program, working in various industries from tech startups to creative agencies and even community organizations. The documents detailed their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. These kids, they were given a chance, Richard continued, his voice steady. A real chance. And they're changing their lives and their communities. Maria looked up at him, her heart full. This was what she had wanted to see all along. I never thought I'd be able to make this kind of impact, Richard admitted, his voice softer now. But these stories, they've changed me. You were right. It's the small things that matter. It's about seeing people for who they are, not just what they can do for you. Maria nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. I'm proud of you, Richard, she said quietly. But remember, this isn't the end. You made a difference, but there's always more work to do. Richard smiled back, a genuine expression of gratitude. I know, and I'm ready to keep going. As Maria left the office that day, she felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in a long time. The journey had been long, but it had been worth it. Richard had changed, but more importantly, he had learned something that would stay with him forever. The true meaning of power wasn't about control. It was about lifting others up, giving them the chance to rise, and being there to support them when they did. For the first time, Maria felt like her work was done. She had helped Richard see the world differently, and in turn, he had helped change the lives of many others. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, she truly believed in the possibility of lasting change. Months turned into a year, and the transformation that had started with a single conversation between Richard and Maria was now a movement. The mentorship program had grown exponentially, touching lives in ways that neither of them could have imagined. Maria had stepped back, watching from the sidelines as Richard continued to lead the initiative, pushing boundaries, creating opportunities, and most importantly, listening to those who had long been ignored. One afternoon, as Maria was finishing her shift, Richard walked into the restaurant, his usual confident stride tempered by something softer. There was no suit, no entourage, just him, a man who had changed. Maria, he called out, catching her attention. Do you have a minute? She nodded and followed him to the quiet corner of the restaurant. I wanted to ask you something, he began, his voice carrying the weight of the months that had passed. How do you keep going? After all the setbacks, the people who don't believe, the ones who never see what you've been trying to do, how do you stay strong? Maria looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You get used to it, she said quietly. You get used to being overlooked, to having to prove yourself when others don't even see you. But you also realize something, that you don't need their validation. You just need to keep moving forward, for yourself and for the people who need you. Richard was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He had never truly understood what it was like to be in Maria's shoes, to fight for every inch. But he had come to appreciate her strength and resilience in a way that went beyond words. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand, he said finally, but I'm trying. And I just wanted to say thank you for everything. Maria gave him a small smile, one that spoke volumes more than words ever could. You don't have to thank me, she replied. You're doing it now. You're making the change, and that's all that matters. As she turned to walk away, Richard called after her. Maria, you've helped me more than you know. I didn't just learn about business. I learned about life, about what it means to really see people. And I couldn't have done it without you. Maria paused, her back to him. She didn't say anything at first, but then she turned slightly, just enough for him to see the flicker of pride in her eyes. You did it, Richard. You just needed to open your eyes. She walked away, leaving him standing there, the weight of her words sinking in. Maria had always known that the road to change was long and difficult, but seeing Richard, a man who had once been so closed off, begin to truly understand was a victory in itself. She didn't need a thank you, didn't need accolades. She had done her part. Richard would continue to lead, continue to change lives, and now he saw the world in a way he never had before. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like it was headed in the right direction. It had been over a year since Richard had started down the path of change, and the impact was undeniable. The mentorship program was thriving, and Richard had become a figurehead of a new kind of leadership, one rooted in empathy and understanding, not just numbers and power. He had learned to step back, to listen, and most importantly, to give credit where it was due. Maria had watched from the sidelines, proud of the man Richard had become, but still cautious. She knew that real change wasn't a one-time achievement. It was an ongoing journey. One afternoon, as Maria was cleaning up after her shift, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. Richard walked in, looking more relaxed than usual, a warm smile spreading across his face. Maria, he greeted her, his voice full of appreciation. Do you have a minute? She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron as she turned to face him. Of course. What's up? Richard took a deep breath, his expression serious but not heavy. I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come, about everything we've built, all the lives we've changed. But there's still something I haven't done, something I've been meaning to ask you. Maria raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. I want to do more for people like you. The ones who have always been overlooked, the ones who have had to fight for every opportunity. I want to create a legacy that goes beyond just a mentorship program, something that lasts for generations. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had always believed in the potential of the program, but hearing Richard speak with such conviction made her believe in it even more. What exactly are you thinking? She asked, genuinely curious. I want to build a foundation, a place where young people, especially those who have been held back by circumstances, can get the support they need, not just to survive, but to thrive. I want to give them the tools to succeed, the resources to dream bigger, and the platform to show the world what they're capable of. Richard's words were filled with purpose, and Maria could see that this wasn't just another business venture for him. This was personal. This was a chance for him to leave a real, lasting impact. That sounds incredible, Maria said, her voice steady. But how do you plan to make it happen? Richard smiled. That's where you come in. Maria looked at him, a bit surprised. Me? Yes, he replied. I need someone who understands what it's like to be overlooked, to be underestimated. Someone who's lived it. You've been with me every step of the way, and I trust you more than anyone else. Will you help me build this? Maria felt a sense of pride swell inside her. She had always known that her purpose was bigger than just serving food and drinks. It was about making a difference. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "Let's do this." Richard's face lit up with a genuine smile. "Thank you, Maria. This is going to be amazing." As they stood there, two people from different worlds, but united by a common cause, Maria realized that this wasn't just about helping Richard build something bigger. It was about building a future for the people who had always been overlooked, who had always been told they weren't enough. Together, they would change the world, one life at a time. Months passed, and Richard and Maria worked tirelessly to build the foundation they had talked about. They traveled to various communities, meeting with mentors, students, and families, all of whom had been touched by the program. The foundation began to take shape, and with it, the promise of a brighter future for many young people who had once been told they didn't belong. Maria had become more than just a guide to Richard. She was now a co-founder of something that had the potential to change lives. As the foundation grew, so did their vision. They established scholarship programs, mentorships, and job placement initiatives that reached hundreds of students. Richard's company also started partnering with other organizations to offer internships and job opportunities to those who had completed the program. What had started as a small idea between two unlikely partners had blossomed into something far bigger. But as the foundation's success grew, so did the challenges. Maria was no longer just overseeing the mentorship program. She was now managing multiple teams, working long hours to ensure everything was running smoothly. At times, she felt overwhelmed. One evening, after a particularly long day, Richard called her into his office. She walked in, tired but determined. "I've been thinking," Richard began, "about how far we've come, but also about the weight we carry now. This isn't just about us anymore, Maria. It's about the future of everyone we've promised to help." Maria nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. The pressure was mounting. As the foundation expanded, the expectations grew, and it was easy to forget why they had started this journey in the first place. "We can't do this alone," Richard continued. "I've learned that now. We need to keep pushing forward, but we also need to stay grounded, to remember what really matters." Maria sat down, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "I know," she said. "It's easy to get lost in the details, but we have to remember the people we're doing this for. They're the reason we keep going, even when it feels impossible." Richard looked at her with a deep sense of gratitude. "You've taught me so much, Maria, about business, about life, about what it means to really make a difference. I could never have done this without you." Maria smiled, her eyes tired but hopeful. "You've learned, Richard. You've really learned." They both stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the years they had spent working together settling in. The journey wasn't over, but they both knew that they had come a long way. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a small decision to help someone in need, had turned into a legacy, and they weren't done yet. As they left the office that evening, side by side, Maria felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. They had built something meaningful, and it wasn't just changing their lives. It was changing the lives of so many others. And that was what mattered most.